chapter, and we are so happy to have you with us this evening. For those that are actually on Zoom and those that are watching us on YouTube, thank you. So we're going to dive right in as we always do. And I just want to refresh our memories on all of the great work that we've already done. We started out with the state of Black wealth. That was our first session. Then we moved into the 3 Ps for investing, understanding your purpose, principles, and passion. The third session was on Tax Matters 101. That actually was one of my favorite sessions. Then we went into all about trusts. And then our last session was estate planning basics. And so, ladies, we have done so much leading up into this point. We've also started a financial investment club that meets with us the first Friday of every month. So we're putting things to practice hands-on, where you're understanding the principle, understanding an asset category, you do your own research with your team, and then you come back and present. So I will pause there. And Tiffany, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce our other guests and panelists this evening. And they're familiar faces, ladies, if you've been with us throughout the series, but they're back with us. So Tiffany, why don't you do that, and then we'll dive right in.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you, Adrienne, and thank you to the lovely ladies, the alumni of the Spelman College. This has been a great journey for us. And I tell you, we have had as much fun with this journey as hopefully you have been able to pick up knowledge on. Wendy Gatlin and Tara Butler, who we've seen before. Tara did that wonderful tax session for us back in November of last year. And then Wendy followed up with a great retirement and estate planning session for us last month. And if you ladies were in attendance, what you heard me say is that these are two of the baddest sisters in the wealth management industry, period. They deliver in their day-to-day jobs a service that, quite candidly, is very difficult to find, because it's an end-to-end comprehensive service that really allows for our clients to tell us what their goals and objectives are, short-term and longer term. And then these ladies use a myriad of tools and very sophisticated analysis to be able to tell those clients and guide them on how they get from point A to point Z. And it's not just about the investments, it's really taking a look at their entire financial situation and making recommendations that allow them to integrate into their everyday lives the type of discipline and behavior that will ultimately result in them being able to move to the next stage of their life with very little, great ease and very little disruption. So today, as Adrienne mentioned, we're going to kind of take a pause in the discussions we've had to date and try to pull this all together and culminate a bit of a strategic plan for you that really helps you take the basics that we've learned today, to date in the sessions we've had, and apply them into a plan so that you can begin this wealth building journey that we've discussed, and more importantly, begin the path to creating generational wealth. The ladies have a couple of scenarios that we're going to take you through. So today's going to be a bit of a case study, if you will. Tara's going to take us through a scenario that really looks at people who are probably more mid-career, which many of us today who joined today are, and talk about some of the things to consider when building a wealth plan. And then Wendy is going to take us through a little bit later in career, as you're looking to actually step away from your career and move into the next phase of your life. And then we'll open it up for some great discussion. So again, we're so pleased to be with you again this afternoon or this evening. And I'm going to turn it over to Tara Butler to walk us through the mid-career wealth planning and building scenario. Tara, take it away.
Tiffany, before you go to Tara, ladies, as you're on, will you please put your class year in the chat, just so that we make sure that we're hitting the relevant information. So if you would please warm up that chat feature, put in your class year, and we will go from there. So go ahead, Tara.
All right, well, thank you very much. Happy to be here with you all this evening and to kind of run through this. I had a great time the first time I was here, so I'm excited about being here again. And I think this is a great time, since I know you all have received a lot of information from us, is how do we put it all together? And, what does this mean? I'm also excited to hear about your investment club, because this actually will play a part in building wealth. So the scenario that I'm looking at right now is going to be for those of us who are in our mid-career. So at this point in life, you've gone from probably debt, accumulating debt, paying off debt, to now you are accumulating wealth. You now have some assets. You are now probably looking at, hopefully you're, depending on what career you're in, you could be looking at executive comp. You're going to start looking at a lot of different ways. But you also may be in that phase of where you have children, maybe they're in school, maybe they're starting college. So how do you go about creating wealth, saving, but then also paying for, college? So those are some of the scenarios we're going to look at with Tracy and Jackson mid-career. And so, let's see. I have to do it the old-fashioned way. So here we're going to look at some assumptions that we have here. First is that we're going to assume that Tracy, she is now a senior production manager at SAA Global Entertainment, Inc. She's now making $150,000 annually, along with salary, bonus, and also receiving restricted stock units. Her husband, Jackson, he owns his own company, and his annual income is about $175,000. So they definitely have the income coming in. But now let's look at where all that income is going to go in order to create that generational wealth. Well, first we got to look at the fact that they have children, because this is who they're going to look to pass this wealth on to. And so in this scenario, they have two. They have a son named Gavin, who's 15, and Mila, who's 12. They're both attending private school. So along with paying for private school, their main goals are going to be saving for education, to put Gavin and Mila through college, along with planning for their own retirement and moving towards that stage. And so part of that is going to look at the assets that they have, how they're going to be invested. And so what I have here, or what we're going to assume in this scenario, is that, they're mid-career. So their time horizon's a little shorter. And I'm sure when you talk about investments, that when you're at the beginning of your career, you can be a lot more aggressive. You have a longer time horizon for how long you're going to do your investments. But when you get mid-career, you maybe get a little less aggressive, have a little bit more fixed income, not just all equity. And again, appropriate for this stage of your life, but you have that, still have some time horizon to do that. So the first place I want to start looking at is going to be at their balance sheet. And again, this is something I want you all to do as well, is to kind of create a net worth statement or balance sheet of where you are today, and being able to look at your assets, your liabilities, and, to consider, where do we go from here? So here, we're just looking at, in their very liquid accounts and their cash accounts, they have checking accounts and savings accounts. They also have an investment account. This is a Merrill Edge investment account. Kind of look at this as your investment club. This could be where you start putting that money in. But you can see that right now they have about $95,000 in there. They've started accumulating that wealth. Another source of wealth is going to be for retirement. Tracy has taken advantage of having a 401k. She is getting a match. So she's at least putting in the amount that she needs to get the match, because you don't want to leave money on the table. And that's what happens if you have a 401k and your employer offers you a match and you don't take that match, you don't put enough in, you're walking away basically from free money. Now Tracy's made a couple of career moves, and so she's taken a 401k that she had at a different employer, and she's rolled that into what we call an IRA rollover. So again, another account that she has available, for her retirement. Now Jackson, on the other hand, he's been putting all his money back into the business. So along with looking at a plan, I'm also going to look at some holes in this plan to kind of point out where you want to fill in, or things that we can maybe change as we go through this process. Again, so those are their investments, their liquid investments. They also have a home. Primary residence is about 500,000. They're looking at life insurance is what we have next here on this balance sheet. Because again, now you have children that you're caring for, and you need to look at, if you were to pass away unexpectedly, how are their financial needs going to be met? Again, that's part of that estate planning that we know that was talked about earlier, is having life insurance, talking about who's going to be in charge of their finances, who's going to be taking care of your kids as far as guardian. Because again, think about it, you've accumulated some wealth. What happens to this wealth if you were to pass away unexpectedly? So right now, based upon the information we have on Tracy and Jackson, they have about 945,000 in assets. But now we also have a little bit of liabilities here. They do have a mortgage on their home. Their mortgage is about 347,000. So that really gives them right over here a total net worth about 597,000. So they almost have 600,000 in assets, both liquid and illiquid. Think about that you've generated this wealth through investments over the past 20 years, through your 401ks, through your real estate. You have these. Have you properly made arrangements when it comes to wills or to a trust to address what happens to this wealth, and what is the most tax efficient way of getting it to, whether it's your children or to charity or whomever you want to transfer this wealth to? As I mentioned earlier, they are also saving for education. So here they started when Gavin and Mila were young. Right now, Gavin has about 175,000 in his 529 plan. Mila has about 125,000. Again, you want to start, if you haven't already, how do you plan on paying for college for children? Again, if you can start early, and over time, it does accumulate when it's invested properly. So they do have those funds available for that. So I think Tracy and Jackson have done pretty well for themselves so far. And so now let's see what they've done going so far. I'm going to not go over every page on here, but I wanted to look at a budget, kind of look at this as, so now we have all these assets. Where are we putting our money? The power of the purse. What are we doing with it? Well, one is their mortgage. They're working on paying that off. Right now they have a 30-year mortgage. So we have that. For income, I spoke earlier about the income that they have. So those are income items that you have that you'll add to your budget. Other expenses, this is the fun part. Let's see if I can make this a little bigger. And this is the fun part. Looking at where our money goes. So I mentioned earlier that Tracy has only put in 5% of her salary and has received the match. Now, that's the minimum amount that you need to put in, but look at where Tracy ended up over a 20-year period. She still ended up with a significant amount in her 401k. Imagine what she could have done if she had started contributing more or doing the maximum amount into her 401k. Again, if you're able to do it, if you're able to adjust your budgets, the more you put into that 401k, when you look at Tracy in late career, the funds that she'll have available for retirement, that compounding, that investment, it does add up and it's so helpful. She's looking at, she has to pay taxes on her real estate, insurance, maintenance. These are all the things that we know come. We have car notes, we have our utilities, phone, internet, cable, food, clothing, entertainment. Now we're going to assume this is post-COVID. We're going on vacations. We're spending money on vacations. Again, we have education for Gavin and Mila. We're saving money for that. And I'm sorry, we have private school first, and then we're continuing to put money away for Gavin and Mila in their 529 plans, which will pay for their college. When you're creating a plan like this, and part of this is your budget, this is where you can start to look at where can I move some money around if you decide I want to put more money into either my investment account, into the investment club, into my 401k. I could look at this and say, well, entertainment, 12,000 a year, do I need to pull back? Is there any way where I can change that? Is there any way that I can change, on clothing or vacation or miscellaneous? There are certain things where you have to have a place to live. You gotta educate your kids. Those things, less wiggle room, but definitely more when it comes to these categories. When you keep track of these type of items, it'll be easier for you to figure out where can you start moving that money around to again allow you to create more generational wealth. And I'm going to just kind of jump through a couple of pages to show that with Tracy and Jackson's, we talked about their income, we've talked about their expenses, their balance sheet. Their goal is to retire at age 60, which will be in the year 2037. And so based upon their budget, their spending, they're going to have that taxable account, which started off with just a mere 175,000, or actually started a little less than that. And they are contributing to that every year because they are actually having cash left over. Once everything is done, and let me go back to that page, is that here's kind of what their overall net budget looks like, where they have, here's their income, her salary, her ordinary income, all of their expenses. We have loans, contributions to 401k. We've captured everything here. And in this net cash flow, it's actually showing what they have available at the end of the year to be able to put into a taxable investment account. So based on their current spending, they're able to see that we're able to put more money into investing, being able to create that generational wealth. So when they continue to put those dollars in year after year, this summary is showing that when they retire in the year 2037, those contributions with those investments have grown to over almost $3 million. That's just their taxable assets. And then when you look at their tax deferred, that's going to be the 401k, the rollover IRA. They have about 1.6 million there. Again, she was only putting in 5% of her salary. Imagine what this would look like if she did more. So that total, they have 4.7 million. And again, the question becomes, that's a big number, but is that enough? Is always the question. This is where this practice, this going through this whole scenario will help you to see, well, I may be saving, I may be putting money away, but I need to look long term to see where is that going to potentially lead me, and will that be enough? Is that going to be enough to meet my needs? Well, in this case, and I'm just showing you year by year what their after they earned income, expenses, what their balances end up looking like at the end of each year. So what I have here, which is an even bigger number, is in the year 2063. And this is assuming that they lived to age 88. They've lived a good life. And that on average, if investments go well, they would have about $14 million available, over $14 million available based upon their saving, their investments. So then the question again goes back to, do you have an estate plan set up that has provisions for this 14 million, which this could potentially lead up to if you're saving and investing correctly and looking again at that long term. So I'm going to stop there just to see if anybody has any questions as we kind of went over Tracy and Jackson during mid-career and some of the strategies that you all have learned about over the past couple of months and actually seeing it in action.
And ladies, you can either put questions into the chat or take yourself off of mute.
Well, if there's no questions, I'm going to move along in Tracy's career. She's done well. Now we're going to look at her when she's nearing retirement and what that looks like. So I'm going to now hand it over to Wendy.
Hey everyone, thanks Tara. So we're going to take a little shift. Tara's gone through mid-career strategies, and we're really going to focus on right now. Assuming you are have accumulated some wealth, and the assumption is that you've come to me and said, "Hey, my husband and I are 55. We are ready to retire. We want to retire early. 60 is our goal. Wendy, can we do it? If we can do it, we would like to retire at 60." Move on and to the next phase and next chapter of our life. And so really what we're going to do is move from someone who is at mid-career, that is later on in their career, trying really past, the educating of children. Their kids have been educated. They're no longer paying for college or private school education, but they're later in their career and really would like to retire early. So some of the things that you want to think about when you retire early, I think the biggest thing that people want to think of would be how am I going to pay for healthcare? That is a huge barrier to a lot of people retiring early. Many people work until age 65 so that at least can have Medicare to cover their medical expenses. And so I think it's keenly important to understand if you are of the mindset that we are working with the ultimate, goal of accumulating wealth so we can retire early. I think one of the things you need to think of on a holistic way is not only, paying for healthcare, but really being proactive about your health, right? So there are certain things you can't even help, right? You can't help if you come down with a sudden illness, cancer, whatever. But I do think that talking about your whole holistic planning, part of it is your wealth. You're not just your wealth, it's your health. And so I know we can get into a whole discussion about that, but I think planning for, proper exercise and fitness and doing all those things help to leverage your ability to be able to retire early. Because if you do have some type of illness, whether it be some long-term treatment of, diabetes or high blood pressure or other things, those can be some barriers to you retiring early. So I want you to really think about that. For those of you who have a goal to retire early, to say, 65 is way too long. I don't plan to work that long. I want to stop at an early age and move into some other phase of life. I love what I do, but I do feel like, there's something else out in the world for me past, what I'm doing now. So one of the things I really want you all to think about as part of your financial plan is to really focus on not only your financial health, but your physical health, one, but two, be aware that that is a huge barrier for a lot of people to retire early. And I think so many people do take the chance, and whether it's through a job, to retire early. They don't budget in how much and how expensive healthcare can be until Medicare kicks in. So in this analysis, the next analysis, I'll just kind of build up the scenario that these are two people who have graduated from college, worked right away out of college. And, the wife has continued to work and done well in her company and has moved up the ranks, and she's an executive at her company. Her husband, about 5 years ago, decided he no longer wanted to work for anybody, and he decided to start his own firm. And he's 5 years into his own career. And so they have two things that's going on. She's working, she's carrying the healthcare, she's handling that through her company, through her setup, and she has executive compensation. But then he has a nuance of that he is self-employed, and he has taken his former retirement plan and rolled that over, and they've used some of their investments to help start his career. And they've been chugging along. But the goal is still, as they look at him starting his career 5 years ago, they're 55. Their goal is to both of them to retire at age 60. And so I just want you to level set and kind of think of that as we think of the case study. And as Tara and I go along when we speak, I want you all to sort of put yourselves in any of these stages of life. And if we've missed a stage, please stop us or ask questions to say, hey, this is a strategy that you mentioned, delve more into it. Another thing I wanted to bring about is that many of us, particularly I would say in the African American community, we're charitable in the sense that if we do nothing else, we might tithe, right? You have some type of charity that you benefit, whether it's your university, it's a church, it's just your community. We give back, we're givers. And so in this analysis, I assume that they want to give and they want to continue to give even after they retire. That's very important for them to not only give while they're working, but they want to be able to give post-retirement. So some of the things to think about is, adding that, as Tara mentioned, into your budget. Have that as part of, not only your current planning while you're working and building for retirement, but also post-retirement. And so that's something that's also built into this case study. And so I'm going to walk you through just some things that you might have late career that you wouldn't have necessarily have at a younger part of your career or even mid-career. But maybe as you moved up, you'd have some access to some of these other types of strategies to use and discuss those. And then we're going to talk about kind of build on what we built on last month about retirement. But then I want to see how you can use all of that to then leverage and move into which, you all are also going to be working on how can you use all this information to make sure that you are planning properly for estate planning. So only one moment, let me transfer to my screen. Okay. I've kind of teed all of this up. So some of the things I want you to, I'm not going to go over what Tara has given, but I just wanted to kind of think about this in a way that they have created and saved. And so as you'll see on this balance sheet, hopefully you can see, if you look at all the assets they have, it's bucketed. Some of them in her name, some of them are in her husband Larry's name, some of them are joint. And so as you look, they've accumulated, taxable assets, non-retirement assets, both, together. That's held jointly, about $650,000 of investments. And, both of them have also accumulated wealth outside of their joint account. They have separate accounts. And so I bring that up because I know every household is different. Some people, everything is joint. Sometimes there are, joint accounts, and then each of them have their own separate accounts and separate savings. And so I just wanted to highlight that because I don't know what your strategy is, but I don't think there is a wrong strategy, but I think it's the right strategy for you. And sometimes, each of us come, into a marriage with different amounts of money and salary, and we decide we're going to do a joint, and then everybody else can, once you meet the joint savings, the joint bills, each can save their own. And so I just sort of highlight there. But just think your strategy might be that you have all of these bucket of assets, but you might hold them jointly, or you might be single, right? You may not have a spouse may be predeceased or never chose to get married, and just highlight those on here as well. But I wanted to kind of bring about some of the things that you may have. We talked about retirement assets the last time. You'll see that, as I mentioned, Larry has a 401k that he rolled over when he started his business. Had about $1 million accumulated in his retirement plan about at 50. He has since started at age 50 a SEP IRA that's from his current business. And Tracy has a 401k about $1.6 million as this is her long-term employer, and she's there. A couple of things I want to talk about that you may have access to in your late career is deferred compensation. So you'll see on that line where it says tax deferred assets, deferred compensation. So for those who are unaware, deferred compensation is a company will give you an opportunity to defer your compensation until after you retire. So why would you defer your compensation? Your compensation with jointly or even by yourself may be very, very high at the moment while you're working, and particularly as you get to your end of your career. And you have assets that are, above or, income that's above your expenses. And so rather than take that money at this point and pay taxes on it, you defer it until you plan to retire, and you take it at retirement at a lower tax rate. It's assuming you're going to have a lower tax rate because either you're no longer going to be working, or you and your spouse will no longer be working. And so they'll pay you out your compensation later on at an age and a time selected by you or provided by the plan. And so one of the things that Tracy has done is so far, she's been for the last 10 years, she's been putting about $30,000 a year of her compensation in a deferred comp plan. And she will continue to do that for the remainder of her employment. Another thing I wanted to mention down here is his company is quite successful. His company is worth about $1 million, and he's receiving income, a salary from that company. And so they've gotten to the point where their debt is low. They own a home and they own some rental real estate as well. And so those are some of the things that they're thinking as they approach retirement. They want to pay off their debt because they don't want to be in retirement with a mortgage. So that's some of the things to think about. And the other thing, they've had a condo that they had purchased years ago, and that's another source of income that they plan to keep during retirement. So when thinking about retirement, think about not only just the assets you've saved, but also if there are other investments. You're talking about investment club, other things that may generate income post-retirement. And one of those good items are rental real estate that you purchase and then can later rent out or provide some type of income stream.
Hey, Wendy.
Any questions on that? Sure.
So I just wanted to really underscore the point that you made about things like deferred compensation, because I think a lot of times we don't necessarily understand how to evaluate whether or not that's something we want to actually build into our investment strategy. And that's where, quite candidly, a good CPA comes into play, right? Because you've got someone who can work with you and show you an analysis of, if you defer your compensation based on your current tax rate and what the assumed tax rate would be once you retire, what is your cost? Versus if you don't defer compensation and you pay taxes at a higher level because that income is assumed right now, what is the cost? And then what is the value of those expenses or that tax burden over time? Those are the types of analysis that we really want you all to start thinking about so that you can begin to understand what decisions, what sacrifices, what modifications might I want to make now so that later I'll actually be able to have much more of a nest egg for me to, retire with and move into my second phase with. Oftentimes what people will say to us is, well, I'm living now and I don't want to defer my comp. I've got expenses or bills I need to pay now. I want to enjoy my money, but they don't really understand. And they may here's the point, you may come to the same conclusion and decide, you know what, it's not worth it to me to defer my compensation, but at least begin to look at those types of analysis so that you can make an informed decision, and one that doesn't perhaps, shortcut or undercut what you're trying to achieve long-term just because you weren't able to take the time to go through the analysis. So I just wanted to point that out because I think oftentimes in our community, that's not something that's discussed at all. And, when the opportunity comes from your employer and they send you the email or send you a notice and say, hey, would you like to defer compensation? Many people at first glance look at it and say, well, why would I do that? So I just wanted to make that point and underscore it because it's a bit of a newer concept and one that just isn't discussed a lot.
No, I totally agree. And I do think I can never, and I know I'm sort of biased because I'm, a financial planner, but I do think that I cannot underscore the value of a budget because most people, I'm not gonna say all, but most people, if you go through your budget and you are a high income earner, as we've indicated for these two people, you have room in your budget to defer compensation. You may not want to, but you are at a point, you've not accumulated these assets by spending more than what you make. You just will not accumulate the assets on this balance sheet if you continually just spend more than you make. You've been, many years, you have had income higher than your expenses. And so there you have some wiggle room, whether it's 30,000 or 10,000, there's some, amount of ability that you have. Now, whether or not you want to, as you mentioned, is a matter of personal choice.
Right.
However, if you expect to be in a lower tax rate, let's say these people want to retire at 60 their compensation is going to go away. The expectation would be that because they have lower salary or no salary, they would be in a lower tax rate. So it makes sense for them to defer some amount of their income and take it in retirement, over a certain period of time. One, it supplements your retirement income, right? You don't have to tap into your investments. And two, you're taking it at a lower tax rate. So you're getting your compensation, but if you'd gotten it when you were 55 and working, you might have been at a 35% tax bracket. But if you wait and do it in your retirement, you might be at a 25%. So I think that's a great point, and one that you said oftentimes is not discussed. Even if you don't have a CPA, you may be the person who do your own taxes, and that's perfectly fine. I think they're oftentimes in your own benefits analysis. There's some calculator that can help you do deferred comp. I think the goal of some of these conversations is to get you comfortable. If you've never worked with a financial planner, to work with one, because a financial planner can help you do that and make that choice for you and help you not only decide if you should be doing deferred comp, but how much, and then how to take it. Because when you elect deferred comp, on the front end of it, you elect when you want to take it. And usually once you make that election, you cannot go back and change it. There's some rigmarole you can go through, cause some heartburn, but by and large, you can't go back and change once you elect to defer and how you want to take it. So you want to also understand how to take it. I'm not going to beat this point to death, but I'll also, it makes a difference of how and what you do with your deferred comp. I've met so many people where they have deferred comp and I say, well, how much are you deferring? And they tell me, and I said, well, how did you arrive at that? And they said, oh, I went down the hall and asked my friend and asked my coworker how much they were deferring, and that's what I'm deferring. Or I'll say, okay, well, you're deferring it. What is your deferred compensation invested in? And when you look at their deferred comp, the deferred comp is sitting in a deferred comp plan with their company, but it mirrors their 401k. So now you think of this, you have deferred your compensation and now you put it at risk by putting it in the market. And I'm not saying you can't put some of it at risk, but it sort of is kind of counterintuitive to take compensation that you had at a certain dollar and put all of it at risk on the hopes that you'll earn more, because you could end up earning less. So here's compensation that you earn, you deferred, but because you put it at risk, you're now taking less. So you have to understand how deferred comp is also managed, and how you invest your deferred comp on your company. So that's one thing. And then the final thing I'll say to that is I want you all to understand that you have to understand the company that you work for, because deferred comp is an asset of the company you work for. It is not your asset. Once you defer it, it's an asset of the company. If that company goes under, your deferred comp plan is subject to creditors. So if you're with a startup or you're with any other type of company and you feel like long-term, once you leave, you wouldn't want to have them owing you your compensation, you may not want to defer comp. Even if your CPA tells you to, it still may not be a good idea. So it's other things you need to weigh in. If you work for a large corporation, multinational corporation has been around a long time, may be an issue. But I do want to bring that up for those who may be working for smaller companies, and that may be an issue, something to think about. So I don't want to lead you down a train and say, oh, we heard the seminar, we started deferring comp, and then we lost our deferred comp with some of those people on this call. So there are some other things you do want to think about from that aspect. So thanks for bringing it up, Tiffany.
Yeah.
Let me just kind of move.
Did we have a question?
I'm sorry. Do you have questions?
I thought I saw a hand raised somewhere.
My hand is raised. I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
This is great information, Wendy. So on deferred comp, if your situation changes, can you adjust and then just say, I don't want to do deferred comp at that year anymore? And
great question.
So what are the penalties associated with doing that?
Okay. So your deferred comp election, you make at the beginning of the year of how much you want to defer. So once you've decided to make do your deferral, that usually is enforced until the next annual time to defer comp. So let's just say you decided you wanted to go down the track, you want to defer $30,000, and then you defer it, and then you say, oh gosh, I really missed that $30,000. You're kind of stuck in those plans for that rest of the year, unless it's some hardship. Of course, if you got laid off or something like that. You're stuck with that deferral. However, the next year they'll ask you again. Deferred comp is an annual election. It's not it's not like your 401k plan. You decided to contribute 5% and you never went back and changed it. So they'll take 5% out from now until you go back and change. It is an annual election. And so if you make that election, you might decide you want to do it for 5 years. And you're like, that's enough. I'm like, I trust this company with $300,000, but I don't trust them with $800 to pay me after I retire. So, I mean, there could be a myriad of reasons, but I just would say that it's an annual election. And yes, you're stuck with it for that 1 year. But if you later decide this is not for you, you can stop at any time. You're not, it's not something that you're tied to do every year.
Okay.
That-
And then on the flip side of that, as we look at Larry, who is an entrepreneur, is there an equivalent for deferred comp for entrepreneurs at all?
No, unfortunately, not in the true aspect of a deferred comp plan. What Larry could do is that Larry could decide two ways he's doing his deferred comp. And one way is he's, as you see at the top, in the tax deferred. He's decided based on the revenue of his company, he's going to defer money into a SEP IRA, which is really a simplified employee pension plan for business owners. So he's going to go ahead and defer that. But what he could also do because he has that flexibility and depending on type of the company, he could decide that he is either going to cut his own salary, right? He could decide he's going to cut his salary and not take, and let assets accumulate in the company and decide he's going to take distributions from the company on an annual basis. So he'll bonus himself out. So what he could do is say, I want to leave some of the money up in the company and I don't need all of this right now. So I'll have, if I was making, in this analysis, I think he's making $250,000. He could decide that he's going to make $100,000, $125,000, and he leaves the rest of the money up in his company. And each year, depending on revenue of the company, he decides he's going to take, he's going to bonus himself out, something out of the company. Now that's a, annual election as well. He can decide based on how well or poorly the business does, how well he will, what his decision would be as far as taking distributions from the company. So there's not a deferred comp plan per se that he would set up, but, because he has his own business, he can, control the distributions in and out of the company at any given time. And of course, this would have to be all done with his, tax advisor to make sure he's not running afoul of any tax laws. Any other questions? And if there are coming up in the chat room, just somebody let me know. I have my screen enlarged, so I don't see the questions as they come through. Okay. So one of the other things I want to talk about that leads into the estate planning would be looking at some other items that they have. I think is really key that Tara touched on was looking at life insurance. And so this company, this couple, they've invested in a couple policies. So one of the things they did a long time ago when, their kids were young, they decided that, they didn't know what their careers looked like. But if all else failed, and they needed all their money in retirement, they were going to leave their kids in a better place. And so they have a second to die policy of $2.5 million. They got it at a young age, so it's not super expensive, but it's a policy that's going to pay on the second to die. So what happens with this is that gives them some flexibility. So let's just say life just happens and they've saved to the best of their ability and they retire and, one or both live a really long time and they have to really spend down their assets to maintain their lifestyle as they age. One of the things I think about is, I know it's some stress and we all want to leave our children in a better place, but one of the best ways to do it is leverage some of your, your assets through some life insurance. And so this couple has a second to die policy that's only going to pay out when the survivor of the two of them pass away. And so if they spent down all of their assets and, needed everything in their retirement, at least they would be leaving their kids something. And I think that's something that I think we as a community need to really think about. All of us have family members and some of us have done really well saving and had no problem. And then we have those family members who didn't save well. We had to all put together to make sure we could give them a funeral, a proper burial, and things of that nature. And so I can't underscore enough about getting life insurance at a younger age when you're healthy and just maintaining that policy. I mean, get a large policy when you're younger. If you are, have good health and you want to get a life insurance policy at a very young age for $1 million, $2 million, just to say, look, something happens to me, I'm not going to leave my kids with a debt on my house. I want them to own a house free and clear. So I'm going to leave them life insurance to pay off the mortgage. If they choose to keep the house, I think you just really need to think about how, when you're doing your plan, how life insurance fit. And so I've given 3 different areas of how it may fit. So a second to die policy that will pay out at the death of the last to die. She also has a policy on Larry. She took this out a while ago because, if something happens to Larry, she was going to need Larry's income, back when he was working. So you'll see there's a policy there on Larry's life, a whole life policy that's permanent in place. And then there's a term life policy that they've taken out on Tracy. She has insurance through her job, but she also has a term life policy in case something happens to her. That'll be some income, for Larry to help, with him during retirement with his loss of income. So I just want to underscore I don't think there's an either or, but I think life insurance is something that's complementary. And I know a lot of people have a lot of different opinions about life insurance. I meet people that tell me, unequivocally, they hate life insurance. And I meet people that say, that just, in my opinion, pour too much into life insurance, right? So there's a fine balance. And I do think that life insurance is a way to infuse capital into your plan at your death, or at the death of one of a spouse, to assist with long-term savings or a long-term, estate planning strategy for your children.
So Wendy, we have a question in the chat for you.
Sure.
The question is, what are some things to think about when considering the tax benefits from deferred comp versus opting to take your full comp and investing in the market, real estate, or other things?
Okay, great question. So it really is, you have to run the numbers. So one of the things you want to think about when you're looking at deferring the comp, I think the key thing you have to understand is you have to at least be able to understand what your future income will look like. So you want to gather if you're due a pension, if you're going to have to take an RMD off of requirement of distribution from your 401k or your IRA, you have future rental income, you have all the other Social Security, any income that you're going to have in the future. You have to have a good idea and assessment of what that's going to be to really get a true assessment of how far your income will dip after retirement. There are some people that their income is just not going to dip that much, right? They have so much other outside investment income. They have rental real estate. Even when they stop working, their income is not going to fall that much. But there are others that are really going to have, a decrease in income, and really that delta between for example, maybe federal and state, might be right now somewhere around, let's just say 35, 40%. If that delta is going to go down once you retire, or you anticipate it to go down to about 25%, I mean, you can clearly run the numbers and see that, that is something that, you might be able to make up. You have to run the numbers and say, hey, if I keep my salary, pay the taxes, invest the after-tax proceeds, and let's look at if I defer a part of it and take it down and invest any after-tax proceeds, and I have this deferred comp plan that I can get later. You have to run the numbers to see what it looks like. Also, one thing to think about now is, you don't know which side of the coin you fall. We have spent in a tremendous amount of time, amount of money in the last year, and continue to this year, on economic stimulus. And so, as you know, as the government has continued to push and will continue to push out stimulus, at some point you have to pay for all of the stimulus. The stimulus is needed by so many. And so therefore the government and the Federal Reserve is going to be accommodative and do this and continue to do it probably, maybe once and even twice this year. At some point, you're going to have to pay for it. Government is going to have to raise revenue to pay for all the stimulus that they gave out. And so my thought process is, if you are nearing retirement, if you are Larry or Tracy late career, one of the things you want to think about is, as you gather your post-retirement income, what if income tax rates go up? Maybe I'm deferring to a higher income tax year or period or rate than I am right now. And so you want to run some scenarios with that as well, assuming that maybe, if tax rates aren't going down much, or if they, go up, even though I have less income and tax rates go up, does it make sense? So I think that this is really a numbers game. You have to have a CPA, a financial planner, or someone run the numbers before you make that decision, to Tiffany's point earlier.
And Wendy, we have another comment. Thank you, Thelma. She wanted to point out that she is an agent, and that one other point is that life insurance proceeds are not subject to taxes, but that your 401k or other investments your beneficiary may be taxed on those.
Yeah, and I'll qualify that because it's important how you hold life insurance. So life insurance, if you are the owner and the insured, life insurance proceeds can be included. It's not income tax, but it will be included in your estate tax. So let's sort of just kind of think about that too as you do life insurance. It's important how you hold it. And so thank you, Thelma. Good to point that out. But I do feel like, as I underscored before, I do think life insurance has a place in your plan, and knowing how much to have and how much to get is different for each and everybody in their plan. But I do think it's a way to, leverage and infuse capital into your estate plan, either for a surviving spouse or or your children. And life insurance also can be owned by trust. So if you buy a $2.5 million policy for your children, it can be owned by trust, and those assets can go in trust. And even if you buy a policy for your surviving spouse, you can leave those it can be owned by trust and go into a trust, and you can decide how your children as well as your spouse get those assets out if you want to further preserve multi-generational wealth. So I'll just add that in there too. But thank you, Thelma.
Hi, I had a question.
Sure.
Term versus whole life. So I'm 39 years old and I have term life insurance. My husband and myself, we have term life. And the way I understood it, and I want to just confirm if this is true or what you suggest, is that you should get term life insurance until your kids are maybe in college or your financial needs aren't as you aren't as necessary to fund school and other needs, if you were to pass and have children at a young age, and then to switch it over to whole life insurance, maybe when you have kids out of the house, expenses have lowered. Is that correct? Or is that how you should kind of factor those numbers in as far as how much to get for term versus getting whole life insurance?
Yeah, so I'm going to give you probably an answer you probably don't want to hear. And it just depends, right? It depends on each individual situation. And the reason why I say that is because the reason why people have either term and whole or combination is term life is cheaper than whole life. And so if you need a lot of insurance, $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, whatever it is, to just say, you die prematurely at 39, you still have to educate your children, you want to maintain your spouse's standard of living because, he's going to lose your future income and all your earnings. Then if you want to buy, a larger amount, term life is probably the cheaper way to go. But I do think there can be a place for even a universal or, whole life policy, or I'll just say, I won't even call it, in this analysis, I call it whole life. I would just say more permanent types of insurance. Your life insurance agent, along with your financial planner, can decide which type of insurance. But when I think of whole and term, I'll say term and permanent. In this analysis, I use whole life, but I just think that there may be a combination of term that's going to end at a certain time. Let's say you have a 20-year term policy that gets out past your children, being educated, and something happens to them, that's there in case if, something happens to you. Permanent insurance is going to be there even after that 20-year term. And why I think that has a place is that, as I mentioned before, you may have some health need or health issue 20 years from now, and you are either uninsurable 20 years from now, or it's just so expensive to get some whole life at 45 or 55 when you could have gotten it at 30 or 25 when you first started having children. So I think there's a combination. The way I look at it is term life is when you want to insure against a risk for a certain period of time. If I die prematurely, I want $1 million to be available or $500,000 available to educate my 2 or 3 children. This has a plan, and this is what I'm going to do. And it's clearly earmarked for a time period. Where I think a permanent policy is, these are proceeds that I'm willing to continue to invest in and pay because I want that to be here and available well beyond the 20-year period. And I'm young now, and I'm willing, and I have the access, the ability to pay for a policy long term. And this is going to be permanent well beyond when my children are educated. This is something that I want to, leave to them. I will say that if you get a policy that's permanent, you have to also have it reviewed. Just make sure you're not getting a policy that's outdated, that you got it at 25 and now you're 35. Mortality rates change. And so it's always good to have your insurance policy reviewed. every 5 to 7 years, just to make sure that, the policy doesn't need to be exchanged or transition to something that may get you a bigger death benefit for a cheaper price.
Thank you. That makes sense. Thank you.
Hey,
No problem.
Adrian, I want to make sure, I want to do a time check because clearly we could talk about this literally all night long. And the dialogue is so great here, but I want to be conscious of time. And I know we are always prompt to make sure that everyone can get on with their evening. Do we have time for another question or should we wrap up with
No,
some
we have
closing
time for
comments now?
one more question,
Okay.
and that would wrap up the evening.
Okay.
Is there another question out there? Well, I'll throw one out there. There are many on this call that are, we're in the sandwich generation. And so a lot of what we're talking about right now in the plan is specific to your immediate household. But how do we take into consideration the other strategies for, caring for maybe parents as well?
Great question. So one thing I want to add into this this discussion on the insurance, the one thing I want people to also look into is a long-term care policy for yourself.
Yes.
Because one of the other things that you need to think about is, the whole idea is to, leave multi-generational wealth. But one thing that can erode your assets as you age, as I mentioned before, if you have some healthcare need. And even if you just live a long time, right? This just, we all want to live a long time, but there's certain things that, at 95, we may need somebody else to help us do, or at 85. And so that comes at a cost. If we need some type of long-term care, it would be good to have a long-term care policy. A lot of people do not like long-term care policies because they wait till they're 55 or 60 and try to get it, and it's so expensive. One of the ways you could look at getting it, which I would say probably between 40, 42 years old, kind of maybe, look at, because it's much cheaper and it's a long time. Like if you don't need this until you're 85, you might be paying long-term care insurance a really long time. But one thing you can look at is getting what's called a hybrid policy, where it's life insurance and long-term care policy. So if you never need it or tap into it for the long-term care piece of it, you at least have some life insurance that then go to your children. And so that's a way to structure it. As it relates to your parents, many of our parents don't have long-term care. Some do, but
Right.
many of them don't. They think they've saved well enough for assets. They put us through college. They kind of think, hey, I've saved, I'm good. They get a pension, whatever. But as you mentioned, one of the things that, can happen is that even with their pension, even with their Social Security, as they age, they still may need some additional care. And so if that is the case and you plan to retire and you feel like, is a possibility that you might need to, send mom and dad $1,000 a month or $2,000 a month because you got to have nurse come in or some, a CNA come in and help them out, a few days a week. I think that's keenly important to, one, put that in your plan to help supplement your parents, but also so that you can, when you know better, you do better. But so when you can help your children so they don't have to supplement you get a long-term care policy. And a lot of companies now, and I know Bank of America does, they offer a long-term care policy that's portable, meaning that when you leave that company, if you choose to leave, you can take that policy with you and still have long-term care. And so that's really important. If you get it at a young age and your company offers it, make sure it's portable, that you can take it once you leave. So that's something that you can have. But that is a great way to ensure that you have some funds available to, you as you age, that you don't have to spend down all of the assets that you hope to leave to your children, that you could supplement it with a long-term care policy.
Yeah. And just to add to that, before the last year with COVID, right? So let's remove that to the side. The reality is major health illness was the number one reason for bankruptcy in this country. And to the point that both Tara and Wendy have discussed today, it's so important to make sure that we're preparing now for things that we can't necessarily see in the future. And what would be just think about it. It would be devastating, not only to the way that you live, but just mentally, to know that you've worked for so long, so hard, to try to create a situation for you and your family where you're trying to create and start generational wealth as a legacy. And then to have one major illness, which the reality is every family will have one major illness occur to someone in the family during their lifetime. To have that occur and then it just wipes out everything you've worked for. It's just heartbreaking. And unfortunately, in our business, we see that more often than we care to. And so, Adrian, I would say it probably makes sense for you all to have a deep dive. We're happy to help out with it if needed, around the whole topic of insurance. As Wendy mentioned, and to your question, this is the sandwich generation where you got stuff coming out both sides, right? You have people pulling on you left and right. But when you think about the fact that Black women today are equal to our white female counterparts with the highest life expectancy, 78 years. Again, this is pre-COVID, so we'll see how the stats pan out after we're through this pandemic. But at 78 years old, that's the average life expectancy for Black women. And it could go way beyond there. We just need to make sure that we're doing the things now and leveraging the tools that are around us that we were never taught about, to ensure that as we mature and move into those other phases or future phases of life, that we can do it in a way that's not only comforting, but is also dignified. And that's where these insurances come into play, to ensure that you can have the type of care that you want to have, or that members of your family can have the type of care that you want them to have as they get older and can mature in a more graceful manner.
Exactly. Well, ladies, another fantastic session. I feel like we are still just tuning up our path to becoming financially fit, So thank you so much for joining us this evening. Again, if you are a member of the Atlanta chapter, join us again on March the 5th for our investment club session. Get signed up with the group so that you can put these things into practice. And then we'll be back with Bank of America again on March the 17th. Tiffany, what will our topic be? Do you recall?
Our topic on the 17th is
Taxes 201.
It's Taxes 201. That's right.
That's what it is. So we will see you back on March the 17th. Thank you, ladies, and have a great rest of your evening.
Take care, ladies.
Yeah.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.